Okay, so thanks for staying. So we'll get started with the results section. How many here have entered results before? Okay. So you guys know it's just their strict guidelines. They have very rigid guidelines on entering results. So hopefully this can make things a little more clearer. Again, if you guys have any questions, I'll pause for questions in between, and then you can always come up to me later and ask me as well. So just to recap, for those of you who are joining us now, so ClinicalTrials.gov does have the two sites. There's the public site and our site, the PRS, which is register ClinicalTrials.gov. If you don't already have your account, let me know. So trials that meet the NIH definition of a clinical trial are those that involve human participants, those that have the intervention applied to those participants, and you're assessing the effect of that intervention as a behavioral or biomedical outcome. So look at behavioral outcomes are also included in the NIH definition. The FDA criteria for an applicable clinical trial are those that are trials of any drugs or biologics other than phase 1, trials of any devices, a trial that has one or more sites within the U.S., any trial that's under the investigational new drug application or investigational drug exemption application, and then a trial that involves any drug or biologic that was manufactured here. The other organizations that also require results reporting are the WHO, and they also have the same rules as FDA and NIH, which is results should be reported within 1 year of the primary completion date. Again, same as the registration compliance. Okay, same as the registration compliance fines. If your record itself is non-compliant, you could be fined up to $11,569 per study per day by the FDA. Now, this fine is placed against the institution, not the PI themselves. But how it will work is if the institution gets fined, that they will approach the department and then in turn the PI. So please make sure that these records are remain compliant. The NIH, on the other hand, if you are non-compliant, can withhold funding. So as a recap, as we said, for registration, you are required to do it by the FDA and NIH and NCI within 21 days of enrollment. Results should be reported within 1 year, and they all are following the same criteria within 1 year of the primary completion date. But with the NCI, you have an option. You can either report it in ClinicalTrials.gov within 1 year, or these results have to be published in a peer-reviewed journal within 1 year. So it's either or. But if your study still falls under the FDA and NIH criteria, then you are required to report results. So these ones are the main criteria that you have to follow. NCI just has their caveat. CMS also is study-specific. World Health Organization advocates for 365 days within the primary completion date. ICMJE does not have a specific criteria for when you need to report results in ClinicalTrials.gov, but as I said, they do want you to register before enrollment. And then a lot more of these foundations are actually putting this requirement into their terms and conditions. So your PIs need to be aware of that, and this is something that's usually communicated through ORA, but it would be in their terms and conditions if they are required to report results. So even if they didn't fall under any of the other criteria, if it is in the terms and conditions of the grant that they need to report results, then that is a requirement.
So, the completion date.
Yes. Yes, I'm going to discuss it. Yes. So, as a reminder, so your results are going to be due within 12 months of the primary completion date. And remember, the primary completion date is the date the last data point for the primary outcome measure was collected. And we'll go into more details about that again later, but just to make sure that that is not when data was analyzed, but when data was collected. And Serena, what we were saying is when I say data analyzed, it's data analyzed and not lab values analyzed. So lab analysis is part of the actual results, but when data is analyzed, that could take a long time based on the biostatistician and things like that. So it's when the last data point was collected for that outcome measure. So even though we due within 12 months of the primary completion date, we've noticed that the average review cycle, so the time from when we release it to ClinicalTrials.gov to the time when they review it, they send you back comments, we reply to the comments, they review it again, it's taking up to 80 days. And while it's in that 80-day cycle, it could become late. So it's not like in school where you hand in on the due date and it's done. No, if you hand in at 12 months and it takes 3 months for them to review it, well, your record is late by 3 months. So we recommend that you start entering these results 3 to 4 months before the due date, so that if we release it, even if it does take the full 80 days for the review cycle, you're never going to be late. Right now, within SKCC, we're catching up on old records, on late records, and it's hard to plan for this. But as we work forward, especially for these new studies that are coming to an end and we have to start entering results, it's good to plan this out 3-4 months in advance. And I will be emailing you reminders that, hey, your study is completed or is planned to be completed in 4 months, start entering your results. Or at that time, if you notice that, no, we're still recruiting, there's no way we're going to be done this study, then just update your completion date. So that's the whole point of making sure your study is your record is up to date every year, because you can update those completion dates. So if you see that, no, we're still going to recruit for another year, another 6 months, then you know that your completion dates can be pushed forward or pushed back.
So the completion dates, I guess you discussed this before.
Yeah.
You enter that when you register?
So, yeah, so when you register, you have to put in the anticipated dates. So you're going to put in your anticipated start dates, anticipated primary completion, anticipated study completion dates.
So that's, but the days we enter there, that's what you go off of?
Yes.
When you send your reminders?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Now, that's why it's important that you do update them frequently. When a record is not updated, I'm not every day going through the IRB and CRMS looking at all the 450 clinical trials at SKCC and making sure that they're complete or not complete. I can't do that. So I'm following ClinicalTrials.gov records. If I see, let's say I see that there's a record where the results are due in December, and I email you saying results are due in December, before I send you that email, I will check IRB and CRMS to see if you've done a continuing review, for example, or if you are still actively recruiting, and I'll let you know that it looks like the study is still ongoing. Please update your primary completion date or enter results, whichever is applicable. And we'll talk about it. Like, it's not something that hard and fast that I'm just going to assume that it's done and you should have already reported it. So that's not how it works, but the only thing I can follow is the ClinicalTrials.gov records. And so that's why it's important that, and that's what the public is following as well. That's what FDA is following as well. So if they're going to issue a fine, if they're going to mark a record as late, they're going by the completion date that's within this record. So that's why it's important to keep that up to date. Now remember with the registration, if the reviewers send you a comment, you have 15 calendar days to reply to that comment. With the results, they do know that it takes longer to correct the results comment, so they're giving you 25 calendar days. But again, those are calendar days, Saturday, Sunday included. So once it comes in, I will contact you. Usually with results, I'll contact you the day of, because I know those usually take a longer time to coordinate with the PI, the biostatistician, if necessary, to address the comments. Hopefully we can keep it down to just one review cycle. So far, knock on wood, we've been able to minimize the number of review cycles since we've been working on records one-on-one. But again, we should be anticipating for the the roughly 3 months review time. The estimate of burden that's set by the FDA, they estimate up to 40 hours to enter results. Now, that depends on your proficiency. That depends on how good the data sets are that you have and the access to the data. I know there's a lot of records that we're still catching up on, so some of the results that you're entering are from years and years and years ago, and you're just trying to make sense of it. Those obviously take longer, but this is on average. The ClinicalTrials.gov office through ICTR also has a fee-for-service option. We haven't had to go into that yet with SKCC, but if the situation arises where it's getting way too complicated, you can't enter the results on your own. I have to enter it for you, and we have to get biostats involved. We have to do like a lot of other extra things. It's $50 per hour that can be billed. Now, something your PIs can be made aware of is that these costs can be built into the grant. NIH allows up to $2,000 to be allocated towards ClinicalTrials.gov records. A lot of PIs aren't aware of that, but we're trying to make them more aware, and I'm actually meeting with the faculty next week, and we'll be discussing that as well. So that is something that you can point out to them, that the option is there. And it does make the grants more competitive with NIH when they know that you've allocated time and resources towards staying compliant. But that is an option. Any questions? So now we get into how do we enter the results. So you've already registered the record. You've been updating the record every year, at least. When you get to your record summary page, about midway down the page, you'll see this section that says Results section. And then you can click on Enter Results, and it will open up the section. Over here, when I'm saying Update the Protocol section, so that's the section that you're updating the study status every year, and if there's any protocol changes, you're updating that part as well. When you're doing this, I would recommend that you edit the arms and interventions accordingly. Make sure that they are correct at this point, and I'll explain why later. But if you've set it up correctly in the protocol section, then it will make things so much easier as we start entering the results. So the first section that you have to work with is the participant flow module. The participant flow is are any of you familiar with the consort diagrams that get submitted at the time of publication? Okay. So the consort diagram kind of shows you how many patients started the study, which ones went to which arm, or which ones withdrew, which ones were removed based on PI decision, which ones were screen failures. So this is the participant flow. Now, this is what I was talking about earlier about the enrollment number versus the number of participants who started. So protocol enrollment, now remember, now that the study is complete, you've updated this in the protocol section already, and they've marked it as an actual number rather than an anticipated number. And the actual number, so here is 132, and it says total started in participant flow was 39. So this means that 132 people signed the consent form, but only 39 of them actually were assigned to a study arm and started the study. So please make sure that these numbers are correct. If it needs to be edited, there's an edit button here, and it will edit it here and in the protocol section automatically. So you only have to do it in one place. And again, yeah, so enrolled is the number of people who signed the consent form. Started is the number of people who were assigned intervention.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Can those numbers be the same?
They could be the same,
I'm
but
saying this only because we entered data as a consortium, and it's not as a site, and as a consortium we don't collect necessarily all the screenings. Is that going to be a problem?
Screening is different than consent.
No, so people who signed the consent.
That is different. So the number of people who consented to be in the study should be the number of people who are enrolled under the protocol.
Okay.
Because they are in the protocol. They signed consent form to be involved in the protocol.
Right. So what were you saying?
So the number of people who consented to be in the study, so who signed the consent form, right, that should be the protocol enrollment number. and then the number of people who actually started the study, who actually received the intervention, or they were part of the placebo arm, whatever the case may be.
Okay, those that we are actually collecting data.
Right.
Okay. What I'm saying is that we don't necessarily have the information on people signed but never went on study for whatever reason.
And there's no way of you getting that information?
Well, we've never done it. I mean, what is it? Do we have to?
That's, go ahead. Did you have?
So you're saying that you screen patients prior to the event?
No.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that.
Yeah.
I'm saying that because we are a consortium, we don't deal directly with the patients. We deal with the institutions who do that job. And what gets to us is only the patients who actually start.
Yeah, we can discuss this later on the side, because
the number is always the same, unless there was.
Yeah, but it shouldn't. So in that case, you should have the number of people that actually sign the consent forms.
Okay, no, because
and you should be requesting that. You should, but we can discuss the details after this session if you want. But yeah, you should have the number of people that consented to the study. That would be the protocol enrollment, and the number of people who actually started the study and you collected data on. Okay. Any questions regarding that? When you are entering this participant flow information, where it says pre-assignment details, so let me actually go to the next slide. So over here, so pre-assignment details. This is what happened before the participants were assigned to each group. This is where you explain why this number is different than this number. Why out of the 132 that signed consent, only 39 started. So here you can see there's a breakdown. It says 132 subjects signed consents to be screened for eligibility. 93 subjects signed consents but did not meet the eligibility criteria to start the study, screen failures, and 39 subjects were assigned to a treatment group in the study. So pretty clear, straightforward. This needs to be there if these two numbers are different. Now, this is what I was saying, where if you set up the arms and the arm descriptions correctly in the protocol section, you don't have to re-enter them here. You can just, it'll say, do you want to copy the arms and titles from the protocol section? And you just say yes, and then this will automatically come in here. If, for whatever reason, you want to set it up differently in the results section, but it's not incorrect, it's just a different way of putting it, you can do that. You can just set up a new table, and then if you set it up correctly here, then in the results, when you're entering the results, you can copy it from the participant flow section rather than the protocol section. But it is recommended that you stay consistent throughout the record so everything is uniform. And here you can see that 10 people started in group 1 and 2, or like in arm 1, and then 11 people started in arm 2, and so on and so forth, and how many completed. And then the not completed number is automatically calculated by the system, so it'll just subtract the completed from the started. You have to make sure you include reasons why they did not complete. So there are pre-selectable reasons that are common reasons for not completing a study, but if there was something more specific to the study on why they didn't complete, you can type that in and put that in as an other. But here, and please make sure that you'll see in the gray box here, I know it's a little hard to see on the screen, but in the gray box here, it automatically tallies up the totals. Just when you're double-checking your work, always double-check, just like in school. This number, the 39, should be matching the total number that you added to the participant flow. If it doesn't tally up, then it's a problem. So you have to make sure you've allocated for all the patients that started the study. Any questions for this section?
Like I said, it's been a while since I've done this.
Yeah.
The green sections you see there, you see the word subject listed in there. I mean, this whole thing about participants.
Yeah. Right. So people use subjects, people use participants, people use patients. All of them are acceptable, but participants is preferred.
Okay.
So this study, they use the word subjects. It's not wrong, but they prefer to use the word participants. So I think in this record, it was used so many times that to go in and change it in some places and not other places was not sufficient. So we just left it that way. It's not wrong. It's still acceptable. They just prefer the word participant. Any other questions? So the next section is the baseline characteristics. Again, you have to make sure whenever you're entering results, and this counts as results for the sake of ClinicalTrials.gov, whenever you're entering this information, it should be per arm. If for whatever reason you're not entering it per arm, but you're entering it as a whole group, then you have to specify a reason why. But it's required that you do per arm. So if you're specifying why, it's more of a, it's kind of like appealing your case, and then it just becomes a little complicated when it comes time to actually entering the results. So it's better if these are specified per arm. Your arm titles and descriptions should be consistent, as I said. So you can, if this was set up correctly in the protocol section, you can pull it in this section. Or if you want to use the one that was in the participant flow, you can copy it from there. You don't have to re-enter all of those things every time you go through each of these sections. Your overall number of baseline participants, they should match the number of participants that started the study. If it doesn't match, you have to explain why. So you would explain it here. If for whatever reason the baseline was not collected in some of the patients, you would explain that there. I'm not sure why that would be the case, but that would be the place to explain the discrepancy. And then a measure description. So that has to be provided for any study-specific measures that may not be uniform. So for example, like an ECOG or a Gleason score, those are study-specific. Not everyone knows what they are, so you have to explain what that is, how it's calculated. And just like in the outcome measures where you have to specify the criteria, what the score range is, high or low, is good or bad, you have to explain that. And if there's any specific lab values, you have to say what the normal lab value is. Any questions regarding the baseline? So this is what the table looks like. I'm sorry it's very small. Hopefully when you're looking at it on the paper on the screen, it's a little easier. But the age, so when you're entering age, gender, race, region of enrollment, those are set up by the system. You can choose how you want to enter age. So age, in this case, they chose categorical. So they've said how many are less than 18, how many are 18 to 65 or greater than 65. You could also put in age continuous, which means you have the average age and a standard of deviation or a range. So it just depends on how you have the information and what makes more sense putting it in. The measure type. So if you're putting in the number of participants, you're not going to choose measure type as number and then unit of measure as participants. They have a new field which says measure type is count of participants. So you would just select that. It will automatically put participants as the unit of measure, and then you put in the actual numbers. If you're putting in measure type as being, actually this is categorical, so it is count of participants. But if you're doing the continuous one, and you've said measure type as being like the average, the mean, and then you have the standard of deviation, then your unit of measure would be either years or months or whatever, however the age was measured. So you have to make sure that that is specified. And then it's the same thing for gender. It's count of participants here, count of participants. And then over here where it says PSA, so they calculated the PSA. It's in nanograms per milliliter, so they specified that. And they've said that it's a mean with a standard of deviation. So there's the mean and the standard of deviation. And then it's not on this screenshot, but there's an explanation on what the normal range is for the PSA. And here, for the biopsy of the Gleason score in the for the biopsy, they calculated they calculated how many participants had these different Gleason scores. And you can see here, there's a very detailed explanation on what the Gleason score is. And it says it's an indication of prognosis based on prostate pathology. And it explains what the total score is. It explains what a high score and a low score means. And so all of that has to be explained in detail for these study-specific measures. Any questions? Oh, for those of you who are working on older records and you're putting these in based on publications, so you don't actually have the raw data, but you're looking off of the papers and putting in the data from there, that's fine. But if you don't have, for example, if you have the age as the average age, but you don't have the full range, you don't have a dispersion method, so a standard of deviation or a full range, you have to have something. So we'd have to find where the raw data is. If the raw data cannot be found, communicate with the biostatistician if the same biostatistician is still there and has the information. If not, we have to look into more details to find out, because you can't just put in a mean and not have a dispersion method, or like a confidence interval and not have a dispersion method. So those things are things to keep in mind of when you're entering these results. Any questions? Now the outcome measures. So again, if we set this up correctly at the time of registration, you don't have to go through it and funnel things around and change things up. It should all stay the same. And you've been updating your record every year and making sure if the outcome measure, the measures changed in the protocol, you've changed it here as well. That being said, remember this data has to be entered within 12 months of the primary completion date. That's for the primary outcome measure. The other outcome measures would be within 12 months of the study completion date. Again, you have to report the data per arm. If the number of participants analyzed is less than the number of people who completed the study, you have to say why. So for example, if there were 14 people in an arm, but you only had data for 10 people, maybe the other 4, maybe the biopsy was inadequate, or maybe the lab samples were destroyed, or whatever the case may be, you don't have data for the 4, you have to explain that in the population analysis description. Number and type of units analyzed. So normally, it's participants, so you're explaining how many participants had this outcome. If instead you're analyzing the number of lesions, for example, so sometimes you're assessing the effect on a lesion, and you're not necessarily counting the number of participants with that effect, but you're counting the number of lesions, then you would change that to change the type of units analyzed from the default, which is participants, to lesions, or whatever the unit is. You're always going to specify the unit of measure. So if you're reporting a percentage of participants, it would be percentage. If it's like nanogram per milliliter, if it's months, if it's years, if it's days, things like that, you would make sure you specify that. And please, please, please do not use any placeholders. Sometimes I've seen records where they say 10 out of 10, but 10 out of 10 what? They're like, oh, well, it was all participants. All participants what? So you have to explain why, like, what is being represented here, or don't just put zeros if you don't have the data. So if you don't have the data, we'll discuss that also, but don't use placeholders, please. There are specific scenarios where you can put in NA and then explain why it's not applicable, but those are very, very specific scenarios. It's rare, and that would be something we would talk on a case-by-case basis. There's an option there for you to enter your statistical analysis. It's not required, and sometimes the statistical analysis is not done within the 1 year. So it's for now, it's optional. Any questions so far? So here we have the outcome measures. We talked about this during the registration session. As I said, if you set it up at that point, you're good to go. But again, you have to be very detailed, describing what is being measured, how you're measuring it. So you have to explain how you're quantifying this data. And this may take a lot of communication between you and the PIs. We're not expecting you to interpret all of the information that's there, but it would be a lot of back and forth that may be required when you're entering these results. And then the time frame, you have to be specific if it's day 1 or day 1 post-intervention. In the outcome measure description, be as descriptive as you can. So as I said, if you're using a scale, explain what the name of the scale is, what is being measured in that scale, explain the maximum and minimum scores, what a maximum score means, what a low score means, and you want to make sure that you're also describing what is being measured. So in this case, it's the number of participants. If it's going to be like an INC score, or if it's going to be the, not INC score, the INC count, or if it's going to be the VAS score, you have to explain that here. Any questions regarding the outcome measures?
So if one patient had 2 SAEs, under this it would be a single.
So in this section, in this example, it's saying that it's just counting the number of people, number of participants who experienced a serious adverse event. But sometimes people will count the number of adverse events in total. So that would be the number of serious adverse events, or the number of adverse events, and then you would count that. You remember, there's also an adverse events section where you're reporting all of the adverse events, so that's separate, but sometimes people have this as their safety outcome measure. So that's why I've put it here. And it's a lot of times where it comes back because the outcome measure will say safety and toxicity, but it'll come back with comments because you can't assess safety and toxicity. It's the way they have their phraseology. So this is just an example that I put there. So this is what it looks like. This one, the outcome measure, is change in pain as measured by modified brief pain index at 28 days. So they're assessing a change from baseline to 28 days. They've described here what the brief pain index is, and they've said that if it's a negative score for the change in pain indicates improvement. So it's okay to have negative numbers. So they're saying that the pain went down with the therapy. So here, and they have the mean and the standard of deviation, and it's units on a scale because it's a pain scale. There's no actual measure. It's a unit on a scale. And then here they've explained why out of 18 participants, they only have data from 17, and that was because in this study, 18 of them started, but then they realized mid-study that one patient is actually ineligible, so they had to remove them from analysis. Anyone have questions regarding this? So this is what it looks like on the public site, just so you have an idea. And it's part of the reason why ClinicalTrials.gov wants certain things written a certain way and entered in a certain spot. And it's so that it fits into their template of how the results are reported. So this is the same information that's here, but this is how the public sees it. And it's just reformatted. So now we get to the adverse event section. Anyone have any questions for the results? Okay. So adverse events, you have to report all adverse events, whether the PI says they are attributed to the study, to the drug or intervention or not. Any adverse event has to be reported. Your time frame is the first field on there that needs to be completed, and you can't just say at study completion. You have to be specific. You have to say if it was assessed weekly, or if it was only once or monthly, or whatever the case may be, until the end of the study, and on average how long the end of the study is. So if it's up to 1 year, or if you did just assess it up like for the 3 months, then you can say up to 3 months, and then that's it. So it's based on how your study was set up. The adverse event reporting description, it's not a required field, but this is where if there's anything specific, any criteria that you use to report adverse events, you can put that there. This is also a section where if for whatever reason your study did not collect adverse events, you did not ask for adverse events, you can put that in here. When you are entering results into each of the sections, when it says total number of participants at risk, that should be equal to all of the participants who received the intervention, because potentially everyone is at risk of experiencing an adverse event. And then the other part is number of participants affected. So obviously that is the number of participants who experienced the adverse event. And again, no placeholders. So if you did not assess adverse events, don't enter 0, because then you're saying that no one had an adverse event, but you didn't really check for it, so how can you say that it was 0? You would leave it blank, but you would explain in the description why, you just explain the description that you did not collect adverse events. All-cause mortality. A lot of times this is left blank, and I don't know why. If no one died on the study, then great, say it. So say 0 people died. But here you would include anyone who died during the study for any reason, whether it was study-related or not. Even if they were hit by a bus and it was totally unrelated to the study, they died while on study, so they have to be included. It's all-cause mortality. And it's during the time frame. So sometimes you'll have studies where they ended after 2 years, but then they signed the long-term follow-up, which is a different protocol. Well, it's a different protocol. It's not part of this protocol. So it's while they're on this protocol, on this study, and during the reporting time frame that you put in here. And so the frequency threshold. So let me clarify with that. The frequency threshold may not mean much for smaller studies, but it makes a big difference for the studies where you have like 100, 200 participants. And so that's where it's a minimum of 0% up to 5%. So you have to specify what your threshold for reporting adverse events is. So if you say 0% is the frequency threshold, that means you're going to count every single person who experienced any adverse event. And you're going to list them, and I'll show you what that looks like. If you say 5%, then that means that if 5% or more of the participants experienced an event, you reported it. So if it was less than the 5%, then you did not report that. So that's where you can put in the information, and it helps out when you're reporting like for the bigger studies where you have a lot of, and if one person experienced a headache, for example, but none of the others did, then you're not reporting that one person if it was under the 5% cutoff.
So you choose the threshold?
Yes.
5% is the maximum?
Yeah, 5% is the maximum.
I tried 6%.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah. And then your they specify the collection approach if it was systematic or non-systematic. So this is what the adverse event table looks like. And so here, you can see that 0 people died, which is great. And then you can see like lower down, it says like 12 out of 12 were the total number of people who experienced adverse events other than serious adverse events. And it'll say like you can put in the different adverse events that are there. You can choose from their list. You can say which body system it applies to, but you do have to enter each one. If, in this case, they put the frequency threshold at 0, so they've reported every adverse event because there's only 12 people. But if it was for, let's say, 200 people, 300 people, and you don't want to do 0 because there were like so many that were just 1, 1, 1, you can change it to the 5%. But remember, that's also what's going to be reported to the public. That's what's going to be reported in the publications as well. So just make sure that it's accurate and you've counted for all the events that are there. The serious adverse events, it's the same thing. You would put it in. There's no frequency threshold for that, so you're reporting all serious adverse events. Any questions for this section? And yeah, please make sure all adverse events, whether they're attributed to the intervention or not, are reported. This next section is towards the end of the record where you have to put in the point of contact for the results. Please make sure this is accurate information. For example, in this one, Dr. Loeb is no longer here, but because we're catching up on records, when this study closed, he was the PI of record, so he was still the one to contact, and he is still the one to contact. So now, like if the record was closed and done and made public, there's no reason to go back in and change it. But in this case, if the record is still open because there's errors or results pending, even though he's no longer here, we would change it to his current contact information. So if it's a record that you're working on now and you know that the PI is no longer here, the PI or whoever is going to be communicating based on results is not here, but they're still in communication with you because you need them to enter the results, then you would put in their current information. So make sure that this information is always accurate. And then in this case also, at the time that this study was completed, Dr. Loeb was employed by the organization, so that's why it says the PI was employed. So just make sure that it's accurate. I know, like, because we're working retrospectively, it's a lot of catch-up, and we have to make sure that it was accurate at the time the study was completed. Any questions regarding that? Okay. There's also a document section. So the documents, you're required to upload a protocol for all studies that were completed on or after January 18th, 2017. So all studies with the primary completion date after January 2017, you do need to upload the protocol and statistical plan. These can be within one document or they can be separate documents, but they do need to be uploaded. Please make sure on the first page you have the NCT number, which is your record ID, the study title, and the PI name, and the date of the document. So you can have other things on the first page, but if those things are there, it will be fine. If it's missing any one of these, especially the NCT number, then they will not accept the documents. It might let you upload, but then it'll come back as an error, or when I'm looking at it, I'll email you and tell you you need to put it in. So just make sure that that is there. And I'll show you when you're entering it. So you can either enter the protocol alone, the statistical plan alone, or the protocol and statistical plan together. At this time, the informed consent is not a required document to be uploaded, but as of January 2019, all studies that are approved on or after, I think it's January 20th, but I don't remember the exact date, but January 2019, you'll probably see a notice on, IRB right now that says that there's a new rule. You will be required to upload the consent form when you're entering results. Mm-hmm.
Once it gets amended with amendment, you need to re-upload the consent.
So it has. Because you're doing it at the time of results reporting, it should be the current one.
Okay.
And actually, we have to clarify this because I think it has to be uploaded when you enroll the last patient. So not necessarily at the time of results reporting, but when you enroll the last patient. But those guidelines will all. Pardon me?
Whatever version the patient signed off.
Which should be the most current version, right? Yeah. So, yeah, we're going to clarify these guidelines in January, but this is just a heads up.
Because if you have a revision of your consent, then you have to re-upload that. Even though it's not signed.
Right. So that's why if you're uploading it after the last enrollment, if you're uploading it after the last consent, then you shouldn't have any more revisions to the consent form. But again, like these are all just in the works now, and we're working with the IRB to confirm a strict guideline on when we should upload these the consent forms. But as of now, it's not required. And then your protocol and statistical plan, make sure those definitely are uploaded for all studies with the primary completion date after January of 2017. Please make sure that the date you enter here matches the date that's actually in the document. If there's a mismatch, then they will not accept the document. And these do have to be PDF-A, so archival PDF. If it's just a regular PDF, it won't let you upload. It'll give you an error message. So if you need help saving it as an archival PDF, let me know. Email me, and I can save it for you and then put it on there. Any questions? So now you've made sure all the data is in, you've double-checked everything, you've made sure all the errors and warnings are addressed. Again, as I said, the notes are advisory. If you think it's applicable, then address them. If not, then you can leave them as is. But errors and warnings definitely need to be addressed. Make sure to use the spell check feature and clear any typos that are in there, and expand all the acronyms. And make sure everything has that green check mark beside it when you're looking at the list on the first page. Now remember, because you're reporting results and this is kind of like the end of the study, just make sure all the sections are correct, and make sure that you've uploaded everything you need to upload. Same thing as registration time, just make sure the necessary people are on the access list, because if this does come back with comments and you're away, because there's that strict timeline, 25 days that you need to reply to those comments, we do need to have someone that we can contact. And usually on our end, if we need to let you know that these comments need to be addressed, then we're going to let you know, but we rely on this list, the access list, and the record owner to communicate with. So please make sure that you have the right people on there. And then you're going to mark it complete, and then it's going to come to me. So I will make sure that this is all correct. I'll make sure that you don't have any of these guys. So again, I try to do this within 1 or 2 days of you marking it complete so that we're not wasting too much time. And I'll let you know if anything needs to be addressed. If it's good to go, then great, I'll release it. And you'll get a little, the record owner will get a little notification that it's been released. But if there are any issues, I'll let you know. And then we send it to ClinicalTrials.gov. So with registration, remember the PRS review process took up to a week. With results, it takes up to 30 business days. And they actually do take the full 30 days, I've noticed. So just keep that in mind, especially that's where the, I said to enter results 3 or 4 months in advance. If they send back comments, your reply is due within 25 calendar days. And I'll work with you if you need help with that. We'll address them. And then what will happen is you'll mark it complete again. I will get it, I'll review it, and then release it. So once it's released and it clears, then it'll be made public and the results are there for everyone to see. If you only had entered the results for the primary outcome measure at this time, just please remember that the remaining results are due within 1 year of the study completion date. I mean, you can always do it earlier if you have it, but that's the deadline. Any questions?
Will you follow up on that one too, or not?
Yes, so that's the plan, but right now it's more of a catch-up game. So we're focusing on the primary completion dates. They would get flagged as incomplete. So you'll notice in your PRS that the ones where if the results were due and you went past the deadline, it says late results in red. So for the ones where you did submit the primary outcome results, but the study completion results aren't due, it'll say incomplete results instead of late results. It'll just say incomplete, and so that it'll still be flagged, and you'll still have to address the record.
And a fee, a late fee for those two?
All non-compliant records, so those included as non-compliant, is that $11,569.
But how do they, what dates do they go off?
The completion date. The completion date. Yeah, yeah. Everything is according to the completion date. So it's very important to keep it accurate. Please don't falsely extend your completion date, because even when it becomes time for results reporting and you put in the actual dates, it's still going to backtrack and it's going to charge you for all those months or years or however many, however long it was off for. So it's not going to help you. It's just better just to get it done. I don't want to point any fingers, but it's happened so many times. So please, 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 please don't do that. And then, so that's it. If you need help, contact us. I'm always here. So I'm here at SKCC 3 days a week, and then I'm at Baby the rest of the week. But you can always reach me by email or by phone. I have my cards back there. And it's great having you guys here. Thanks for staying patient through lunch. Thanks.